These are Thoughts from My Car, Episode 4, Part 2. Yeah, I know, there's no Part 1 that's actually been published yet, and it probably won't ever be. And I'll explain. Actually, if I were to take this in the order of all of the material I've ever recorded, this would probably be closer to Episode 6. Except there were some episodes that have not been published, either completely by design or completely by accident. Originally, what was going to be Episode 3 was recorded on July 19th, on the day that I was the official photographer for the wedding of Lisa and Michael. You probably read the blog post that I put up about the two, or my diary of the day with them. Originally, that was going to be an episode of Thoughts from My Car. Because the wedding and all the various locations that we had to go to for shooting photos involved quite a bit of driving, I thought it would be a really neat idea to create an audio diary of the day. And in theory, it was a fantastic idea. In theory, that was gold. In practice, not quite so much. The one thing that I had failed to take into account was that long day plus massive heat, excruciating humidity, and a fair amount of dehydration don't always add up to the most coherent podcast ever. So by the time I got to the end of the day, the Thoughts from My Car were just sort of semi-exhausted ramblings from someone who probably had taken a bit too much sun and not taken in enough fluids that day. So the idea was shelved as an audio podcast for episode 3, and it was instead turned into a blog post, which is up now at sgnr.photo. And in its place for episode 3 is the episode that's currently published, the overwhelming amount of ranting and negativity concerning the Lytro camera, the Weekend Warrior, etc., etc. And that's all fine and good. I mean, I ended up turning a missing podcast into something. It wasn't enough of a quality broadcast to send out to all of you, but it turned into a really decent post. So I made use of it. I'm okay with that. And then I would say about 2 weeks ago now, I put together another podcast to announce the upcoming, and I put upcoming in a few sets of air quotes, just because I can, the upcoming Indiegogo campaign, as well as a few positive highlights that happened over the past little while. And as luck would have it, and as timing would have it, things got really busy around SGNR Photo Worldwide headquarters. And somehow I managed to completely forget that I had episode 4 already recorded. And by the time that I realized I had a completed podcast episode that was ready to go, it was already too late. The Indiegogo campaign had already launched. And so an entire third of my podcast was now completely useless. All of the information was completely out of date. Everything was useless. A lot of things had changed. I went ahead and I kind of shelved that, and I thought, okay, well, I don't like shelving material. Maybe I'll pick and choose the best bits from it, anything that's still current, and use that in my next podcast, which was recorded just yesterday. In fact, not only was it recorded, but I put up an announcement on the Facebook fan page that it was going to be posted as of today, which clearly is not the case because I'm now re-recording episode 4. Once again, a lot of the information that was held in episode 4, which I'm now referring to as episode 4A, the Lost Chapter. In episode 4A, a good chunk of it started off with the Indiegogo campaign, where I basically turned in a self-fulfilling prophecy of saying that By the time I was finished recording the episode, there was a good chance that everything about what I was talking about had changed. And lo and behold, as I complete my update to the fan page to say that it is recorded and ready to be edited and will be up today, lo and behold, I take a look, everything has changed with the Indiegogo campaign, the status of it. And so once again, I find a very large segment of the podcast completely out of date. However, I've decided this is the last time I'm re-recording episode 4, because with various retakes, outtakes, just basically wiping the slate clean, when I start to ramble on and go completely off the rails to the point where I no longer can bring the train back on the tracks and just delete the whole thing, this is probably about the 5th time I've recorded an episode of Thoughts from My Car without actually publishing anything. Which means that I have now recorded almost twice as much material as I've ever put up online. And it's starting to get out of hand, so I've decided that no matter what comes of this particular recording, it will be put up online, flaws and all, for all of you. So, with all of that said, these are Thoughts from My Car, episode 4B, Things Get Real. I don't know why I chose that title. It was the first thing I thought of off the top of my head. As you can tell, I don't script this at all. There are no notes, no scripts. There are just thoughts from my car. And, you know, I really thank you for bearing with me. I thank you, as always, for joining me on the only known photography-based podcast that is willing to admit that it's recorded from inside of a moving vehicle and doesn't just sound that way. So let's get started with finishing up episode 4. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper start to the finish of episode 4 without talking about the now live and now basically, well, how do I put it? You see, originally yesterday, the main bulk of the Indiegogo segment, which was about half of what I recorded, was all about how 4.5 days in, or 3.5 days in, I believe at that point, nothing had really gotten off the ground. No traction had been gained. No donations had come in. And I spoke about how everything I did was absolutely wrong to launch this campaign. And because none of you have actually heard any of this material, I'm just going to go ahead and pretty much repeat what I said yesterday, with a couple of exceptions. In looking over the Indiegogo site, they have, their tips and tricks for creating a really successful campaign and things that you can do. And it was really funny that it was only after I launched the campaign I realized I did absolutely everything wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. They say, for best results, launch your campaign early on a Monday morning. Catch the business crowd, people going in, catching up on their weekend emails, and just sort of, getting that slow start into the business week. What do? They're going to check their Facebook feeds. They're going to see what's going on. They're going to be essentially bored and, have a case of the Mondays. They're looking for something to distract them. So why not distract themselves by looking over your campaign, thinking, hey, that sounds like a pretty cool idea, and donating? I'm assuming that's what they're meaning because they don't really get into that much depth. But, that would be kind of the logic I would use if I was launching it first thing on a Monday morning. So with that in mind, with the greatest odds of success being in my favor, launching on a Monday morning, naturally I chose the very early morning hours of a Saturday to launch my campaign. I'd originally wanted to launch it on Friday, August 1st, but because of some upload speed issues with getting the trailer up to YouTube, I wasn't able to actually go live until about 45 minutes past midnight on Saturday, August 2nd. So that probably didn't help either, was any minor hype that I was able to put together was lost immediately when I couldn't get the damn thing up on time. So that was kind of strike two. And of course the next thing was have as much detailed information and as much audio and video content and previews and posters and whatnot that you could possibly put together to draw people's interest in visually. Have a video that was personal, show your face, show who you are, so you can sort of develop a bit of a rapport with people. I have one video up. It's a trailer. It's all basically still photos that I've taken of various models over the past couple of years, with captions, with bits of video jiggery-pokery going on to make things look a little more slick. And, of course, my voice and face is nowhere to be found among this video stream. So clearly I am doing everything possible to make this impossible. And yesterday I was sort of laughing off the fact that, okay, well, we got off to a bad start, but this is just my way of showing that I can overcome the insurmountable odds of my own lack of judgment and planning of this event and turn it into a success. In spite of the fact that 4 days in, nothing had been donated whatsoever. And of course, just to either prove myself right or wrong, I'm not sure where this falls, by the time I finished recording the episode, got to work and made my Facebook update, lo and behold, the donation train started to pull away from the station. The campaign finally got its first bit of traction and started to get a little bit of funds trickling in, and also started to get a little bit more exposure from people. So that was kind of cool. And as of this morning, things really haven't changed all that much. We're still, we're still very, very far away from the destination. But the journey has actually started. We're not just sitting waiting for things to start moving along. Things are moving. They're moving slowly, but there's forward progress. So I feel happy about that. Now, again, as I said yesterday, this is either going to be the beginning of the documentary of how I overcame the overwhelming odds I stacked against myself when launching this campaign, or it's going to be the beginning of the documentary about how this failed horribly and came crashing and burning down around me. There's still a good 55 days or so for me to figure out where this is going to fall, how the chips will fall. And in the meantime, we're going to see what happens. We're going to see what we can do to get this to the finish line. Now, one thing I can say, there will be some new trailers. I will be appearing in my own video trailers. I will be appearing more on the website through the video cast very shortly. I just have a couple little things that I need to work out, and everything will be fine and dandy in the world once again. So that's coming. It's coming very, very soon. And that's really all I can say right now. So with that in mind, and all that said, the intro, of course, the campaign has launched. I realized that I haven't really given much in terms of detail as to what the whole thing's about. So for those of you who have not yet been to the Indiegogo campaign page, and I will have links to it all over the Facebook fan page, the sgnr.photo website. It'll be basically linked to at the end of all of my blog posts and updates from now until the end of the campaign. So please look, click, browse, peruse, share, and donate as much as possible. Everything counts. everything helps. But for those of you who have yet to go check this out, no doubt you will, but I'll give you a little bit of a preview. Originally what this was going to be was a full-length video documentary about photography and modeling in and around the Ottawa area following the downfall of Ottawa Fashion Week. As you'll recall, back in June of this year, I put up a blog post about the Ottawa Fashion Week closing its doors after 11 seasons, and how really it wasn't going to have that big of an impact anyway, because, let's face it, Ottawa is not exactly world-renowned as a fashion town. It's a government town. It's a bureaucrat town. It's starting to become a tech town, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of interesting tech companies like Shopify that make their home in Ottawa. But for the most part, you're not going to see a whole lot of coverage in the pages of Vogue magazine devoted to Ottawa fashion. It's it's not really something that's going to light the world on fire. No one really pays attention, or so I thought. I realized in speaking with some friends of mine who are photographers and models and designers and stylists, people who took part in this, that there was a fair-sized community that would be affected. Maybe I was being a little too harsh. So I thought I would take a look into this, and I thought the documentary format would make a good starting point as a full-length feature. And so I began to start talking to these friends of mine off the record about possible ideas. And in speaking with them, I began to think that maybe this was more of a backdrop to a bit of a bigger issue that I could tackle. And more so, once I began to see posts online from, of all places, the New York Times, about a recent trend for adolescents, predominantly girls, but I understand that there's some guys doing this as well, basically getting getting out of the shower, throwing on just some very basic plain clothes, no makeup, not really doing their hair up in any kind of way, and just looking at a camera and asking people if they are attractive enough. Am I pretty enough? Am I handsome enough? Am I good looking? And it's part video diary and part kind of almost plea for help. There's obvious self-esteem things going on here. There's obvious body image issues at work. And of course, these issues don't exist in a vacuum. It's pretty obvious, and I've spoken about this in a previous podcast, that beauty standards are pushed down people's throats to an alarming degree. Whether you realize it or not, just from the casting of your favorite TV show to advertising in magazines, TV, movies, we are a culture obsessed with beauty, image, style. And so what I wanted to turn my documentary into was a look at how these issues affect those who are actually in that segment, people who work in the industry of the beautiful people. Are they affected by the same things? Because really, deep down, everyone's a person at the end of the day. When the cameras stop rolling and models stop performing the act of modeling something, or being models, or posing, they're people. And so I wanted to look into this and see how or if these types of things are affecting those who work within the industry. And I didn't want to go around speaking to like psychologists or psychiatrists or or doctors or professors of sociology or whatever, because they're not in that. They're not in the trenches when it comes to this sort of thing. They can observe it. They can talk about what they think or what they've observed, but if they're not a part of it, they're secondhand information. I want to get everything right from the source. And of course, budget permitting, obviously, depending on how successful the campaign is, how much we're able to raise in terms of funds, I would also like to be able to get perspectives from more recognized fashion cities within Canada, Toronto and Montreal, and see how things differ, or if things differ. Maybe it's a whole lot of the same old story, or maybe things are different, with a more established fashion base, as it were. So I thought it would be a really interesting project to take on. And this is what the core funding is for. It's to get this project to fruition. To pick up, the necessary items, to record the audio and visuals, to get the studio rental time, to record interviews, and actually record live photo shoots. I plan to have live photo shoots as a part of the whole thing, to add a little bit of visual interest and to show these models and stylists in their element at work. And, of course, budget permitting, being able to head to or contact people from, maybe speak on the phone with, but in some way interact with people from different cities and get their perspectives on things. Now, the great thing about this project is that if the funding is successful, it's going to be more than just this documentary. This is not the end of the line. It's not the ultimate destination. This crowdfunding train that's now starting to get some traction and move and inch itself along the track is not heading to the ultimate end of getting this documentary produced. In my opinion, that's the first station on the line. The whole idea of this is that with the funds raised and the production equipment that's acquired, that equipment doesn't just get used once and get destroyed. It doesn't fall apart after a single use. What I want to do is take that production equipment that is procured for the production of this documentary, which is tentatively titled, or under the working title of The Beautiful People, and use that equipment to continue to create original material for all of you who donate, for all of you who follow the fan page, for all of you who are interested in this sort of thing. I would like to take what we gain from this and use it to bring you behind the scenes to a photo shoot, to bring you behind the scenes to an assignment that I'm working, maybe a photo booth, get to see how I work a photo booth at a live event, possibly other documentary projects, and most definitely, if it is successful, this is what's going to be used as the basis for an official entry into the 2015 Ottawa International Film Festival, where they have a 72-hour filmmaking competition where you write, direct, produce, and publish a short feature within 72 hours. So these are long-term goals that this campaign is also pushing toward. the core goal, the one that gets everything off the ground and gets everything started, is the documentary. But we're going to keep rolling after that. It's going to keep growing and getting more complex. It's going to take on a life of its own once this all gets going. So once again, please click on the link to visit the campaign. Please donate what you can. Every donation counts. Donation levels start at $2. And honestly, don't feel bad if that's all that you can give. If you can give $2, 1 week and tell 20 of your friends and get them to chip in a few bucks each, it grows. There's strength in numbers, and that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that there are those of you out there who are listening who really like what I've been doing and want to see more of it, that want to see this grow, and are willing to put in just maybe a little bit of work just to kind of bug your friends and say, hey man, this is really cool. Let's keep this going. Let's see how big we can build this. How far can we make this line go? How many stations can we add to the rail, to the track? So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Before I, ramble and repeat the same thing over and over again, which I'm no doubt I already have started doing. We'll leave it at that. And of course, there will be updates over the next weeks, both on the website and fan page, as well as from my car, to let you know how things are going. But I wanted to re-record this today just to make it, to put that positive on it. There is a positive that things are moving along, and hopefully they're going to keep moving along over the next 50-some days toward the end of the 60-day campaign, and we can put this, we can really start setting this momentum and use that energy to push for something bigger. And keeping with the theme of positivity, and in keeping with the spirit of not wasting good material that has already been recorded more than once now, I do want to just sort of touch on some other positives that have been going on lately. Very shortly after publishing episode 3, where I ranted and raved and really couldn't find a whole lot of positives to say about things in general, I had a couple really big positives come my way. I believe it was the very next day after I published episode 3 that I downloaded the latest episode of The Eloquent Gentleman. That would be episode 7, I believe, is the one that I'm referring to, because a couple more have been released since. And toward the end of the podcast, there were some shout-outs given by the gentleman in recognition of fine, upstanding folks everywhere who are sort of championing their cause and their podcast, and just generally being interesting or amusing fellows. And it was really great to hear that I topped the list. I was named both personally, as well as given a shout out for being, for having the photography skills and the photography website, and that was all really cool. That was something I appreciated greatly. I thought it was a very nice gesture on the part of the gentleman. I know I'd mentioned them a couple times in my podcast, but I never really thought that they would give a shout out to all their listeners in terms of what I'm doing. I figured, maybe they'd say my name, like, hey, Rob, he's a really cool guy, listens to our podcast, etc. Wasn't expecting to hear a really good shout out, a really positive shout out given to the photography side of things. And was even more surprised and delighted to hear them give a positive shout out to the podcast. They thought that Thoughts from My Car, the stream of consciousness through stream of consciousness commute was a really cool idea. They gave kudos to that, and that was really cool. And not just for the ego boost of people telling me I'm doing a great job with the things I'm doing. What was really great was that these guys took the time to listen to my podcast, to look over my website, to see what I've been doing, go on the Facebook page, and just have a general look at everything. Not only take the time to do all of that, but to form an opinion about it and let people know what that opinion was. As I mentioned last time, I am a fan, or at least definitely in favor of criticism. Critique is very, very important. Feedback is very important. It's nice to know that there's someone out there that gives a damn to form an opinion about what you're doing one way or another and express that opinion. Whether it's good, bad, or ugly, people are taking the time to do something. And of course, if you've got people who are really fans or people who have really strong critiques against, it shows that you're doing something that's moving someone in one way or another. The worst that you can be is middle of the road. That's kind of the kiss of death for anybody. Just sort of the plain vanilla, like, oh yeah, well, it's definitely there. That would be brutal. Brutal to hear. But it was nice to hear that things were, looked at, dissected, and spoken about in a really intelligent way. So hats off to the gentleman. I thank you very much. That was a very much needed perk me up for my week. The week I was having was rather miserable at the time, so that felt good. And the next major positive was actually a little bit later that week, when I had what could have been a pretty big negative turn into a positive. During that same week, toward the end of the week where I'd released episode 3, I had set up a photo shoot with a model that I'd wanted to work with for quite some time. We'd made plans several times to get together and have a shoot, and for varying reasons, we've had to delay that date for whatever reasons. Life just got in the way. And so we finally managed to connect again. We finally managed to work out a time where we were both available and set everything in motion. We had an idea that we were going to roll with. We had a location. We had a time and a date. And at the 11th hour, the model had to message me and very apologetically state that she would not be able to make the shoot as there was a very important appointment that had been moved up that would overlap our shoot. And she was very apologetic. And I can't hold this against her. One, because, real life issues take precedence over getting out there and shooting for the lulz. And secondly was the previous time that we had to delay the shoot. That was actually because of me. I had asked to put the shoot off for a while because I had just lost my job and wasn't really feeling in the greatest of creative headspaces while I was going about the business of updating my resume and setting up a whole shit ton of job interviews. So I didn't want to go into a photo shoot completely distracted by outside elements and just go out there and pump out a whole lot of mediocre photos that aren't worth looking at. However, this did leave me with a hole in my schedule, and it left me without anyone to shoot with. And so I decided on a whim rather than allowing it to just sort of die on the vine, that I would put out a casting call on the Facebook and see if there was anyone who would be open to the idea of just getting together last minute and having a photo shoot just for the lulz. Just getting together, no real concept, no real preconceived ideas, just camera, photographer, model, location, shoot, go. And within a couple of minutes, to my delight and surprise, I received a private message on Facebook from a model named Kathy Jack, who expressed a willingness to work with me, who expressed interest in what I had been doing. She was a fan of my work and had wanted to work with me for some time. I would come to learn. And what did I have in mind? And that was really cool. Once again, just someone who's a fan, just reaching out of the blue. I mean, not completely unsolicited, but fairly out of the blue. We'd never spoken before or interacted before. We'd never met prior. And just out of the blue, messaging me saying, you know what, I like what you're doing and I want in. And so after a brief conversation, we came up with the idea of a Victorian steampunk-inspired photo shoot down at the locks of the Rideau Canal in Ottawa. And got together the next morning, had ourselves an absolutely wonderful shoot. Some of the photos are already up on the Facebook fan page. You've probably seen them already. And I am looking forward to working with Kathy again. I really had a lot of fun, and by all indications, she still seems to be a fan of my work, still seems to want to work with me. So that's a bonus. Making a new contact, making a new, meeting someone new that wants to collaborate with you. That's always a good thing. So that was a really, really big positive to end off my week. That would be sort of the last kicker before getting in, putting my head down, pushing toward the launch of the Indiegogo campaign, and subsequently recording an entire podcast and forgetting that I had it until it was too late. Moving right along in a complete absence of anything resembling transitional material, it's come to that point of the podcast for the obligatory movie review. And seeing as how episode 3's storm of negativity failed on that front, instead of one movie review, today I have two. I've recently seen a couple of movies, once again shot completely on digital SLR cameras. One of which, a very low-budget independent movie that got an incredibly limited theatrical release, pretty much a straight-to-DVD affair. And another more mainstream, although still pretty low-key, not very much on people's radar type of film, that got a wider release and actually made a fair amount of money. The first of the two films is called Hard-Boiled Sweets. It's a British film, independently made, shot using a smattering of lighting gear and a Canon 5D Mark II camera, which is basically just sort of a mid-level digital stills camera used by many a photographer, especially portrait photographers. And the whole underlying premise of this movie is both very simple and made overly complicated for no good reason. The simple part is simple. The whole premise of the plot is Gangster boss has magic MacGuffin briefcase filled with the MacGuffin bucks, and it's a whole lot of satellite and auxiliary gangsters who are trying to outwit both the mob boss and each other to take hold of said briefcase for their one big retirement score, which is somewhere around $1 million. Or pounds, because this is a British film. On the whole, very simple. Not overly complex in terms of story. You have different gangsters with different personality traits. But more or less, you're feeling that ultimately they're all very much the same. The candy theme is actually pretty apropos because, like a lot of candies, looks very appealing, has a really great initial burst of flavor, ultimately not very fulfilling, and doesn't have a whole lot more going for it other than a lot of empty calories. It's not what one would call complex in terms of characterization. So what was done by the filmmakers, intentionally I might add, was to combine the basic gangster story with a lot of shoehorned elements of film noir. Lots and lots of voiceover narration. Every time we switch to a new character who gets their own title card, a description of what candy treat that they are related to, and what sort of characteristics this candy has, we are treated to several minutes of voiceover narration and exposition because reasons. I really don't know why this was done. This could have been done in a much more seamless way. It was almost like they couldn't figure out if they wanted to rip off Kevin Smith, Martin Scorsese, or Quentin Tarantino. So they tried to rip off all three at the same time. And it doesn't work in terms of story. It starts off very promising. It's got a slick sense of humor in parts, but it, like a candy, that gloss erodes very quickly, and it just gets to be sort of this pasty, sugary whatever that sticks in your mouth and leaves a bad aftertaste. The end of the movie is especially bad. It's not only predictable, but it's very poorly executed in terms of story. Now, that's only part of why I watch these movies. The bigger part, obviously, is I want to see what digital SLR still cameras can do for making movies. I want to see, can really nice movies be made? And in this case, I have to say the answer is yes. Especially the first half of this movie looks gorgeous. The way the coloring is done, things have this wonderfully bleakly desaturated, but kind of look to it. A large portion is recorded at South End, where there's like this sort of carnival thing going on, and it looks very festive, but very bleak and hopeless all at the same time. So the cinematography is really, really nice. The daytime scenes especially, they sing. Toward the end of the movie, of course, fitting with the gangster theme and the noir theme, a lot of it takes place in the middle of the night. It's very covert, very cloak and dagger, and very muddled because these cameras are not meant to record in such low light levels. I think they got a little too cocky with how they lit the scenes. But overall, things look very, very good. So, from a visual standpoint, it's probably something I can reference, that I would keep around as a reference. Just to say, oh, okay, well, oh yeah, that looked really good. Maybe I want to try that. So it's a good visual reference for some things overall. But other than that, probably not something I'm going to watch a whole hell of a lot in the future. The second movie is a movie that's also, I failed to mention that both of these movies are from 2011. So this movie is, the second movie is also a film from 2011 called Silent House, which is a remake of a film from Uruguay, also called, well, it's called The Silent House. So clearly the Hollywood version is very original because they changed the title. For all intents and purposes, it's exactly the same movie. And the premise of the movie is also fairly simple. We follow the journey of a young woman as she wanders through an old, seemingly abandoned house after hearing strange noises, and finds out the house holds terrible secrets and that all is not as it appears to be. Again, very simple premise, very simple setup, and it too is bogged down by a gimmick. Only in this case it's not a film noir gimmick. Here it's a visual gimmick that probably most people would not really pick up on. This movie's visual style is meant to emulate one of the old Hitchcock films, where it looks like every single thing is taken in one long continuous shot, with no edits, no breaks, no cuts. So everything is panning around and we're following people up and down through the house. Mostly we're following the main character played by Elizabeth Olsen, the younger sister of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, who is infinitely more talented, I might add. And we're following her through the house, and there are, sometimes there are tracking shots that move away from her very slightly before she walks back to the frame, and the camera follows her again. But it's meant to emulate as if everything is happening in real time, and we're like a fly on the wall following her along through the house as she makes these dark discoveries. And that would work really, really well if the story was anywhere remotely interesting. Well, wait, let me rephrase that. The story itself is interesting. The execution of the story is not. There are long, long stretches where things just don't happen. You're meant to be swept up in the gimmick, to take notice of the fact that, oh, we're following this character. There's no cuts. There's no edits. Clearly, they're hidden. But we're meant to feel as if we're just following people along. And it just drags in spots. The exposition comes in clunky chunks. And so the rest of it is just not a lot of sound, not a lot of ambient noise, which is by design. It's just a whole lot of, okay, just let's see what's going to happen. What's going to happen next? It's almost like clickbait the movie, because you almost feel like the director and cinematographer are conspiring to put together the ultimate "you won't believe what happens next" type of experience for movie watching, and that's not an experience I want. I want a narrative. I want to see something. It's great to call yourself a minimalist horror film, which is what they're going for, but you have to be a little less minimalist sometimes. You have to be a little more upfront with the goods. So this movie does tend to drag. Now, the performance by Elizabeth Olsen is very good. She's a very good actress from everything I've seen her in. But it seems like you could have inserted any 20, late teen, early 20-something attractive young woman and put them in this, and it really wouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have changed the story one lick. Now, in terms of visuals for Silent House, in spite of the lack of narrative interest, visually the experiment of the one take works really well. Now, this movie was recorded with Canon 5D Mark II cameras, the same as Hard Boiled Sweets, and these cameras have an inherent limitation of only being able to record in stretches of, I believe it's up to 12 minutes per take. And so being able to put together a full-length feature that is reasonably seamless using only 12-minute takes is a pretty cool accomplishment. Now, there are some edits that you are able to pick out that, they're not distractingly obvious, but obviously during the lulls in the story, your brain kind of tries to find something to latch onto for entertainment value. So I was able to pick out a couple of the edits pretty quickly, but didn't distract me overall. Not nearly as much as the lack of things going on. Another thing that was really interesting was the way that they decided to light the movie. The movie is lit using a lot of candlelight, flashlights, lanterns, etc. And rather than trying to hide the fact that it was, that it was lit this way and trying to, account for color casts of different color temperatures of different light sources, they just rolled with it. They just let the color cast happen the same way you would see if you were looking at this just with the naked eye, which I thought was refreshing. They didn't try to color correct everything to death and make it look unnatural in terms of the way it's lit, which was kind of cool and refreshing. So, hats off to that. Now, overall, would I recommend the film? No, not really. It's just too dull. Not enough happens to really hold my interest for very long in terms of the storytelling. Elizabeth Olsen is definitely underused because people who use the word utilize, I want to smack them in the head. Elizabeth Olsen is definitely underused in her role. She could have been used for much bigger things. They could have written more story around the gimmick. The gimmick is very cool, but unless you're paying attention to the gimmick, it's going to go largely unnoticed. And if you are paying attention to the gimmick, well, then, you're going to lose the story. So they kind of painted themselves into a corner with that one. And so that is Silent House for me. Interesting visual experiment, but not something that I would recommend as, a horror movie to put on for Halloween or any kind of psychological thriller. It'll probably put you to sleep. And so, thus ends the movie review segment. And with that, we will end the podcast. I want to thank everybody once again for joining me on this podcast experiment. Again, the only known photography-based podcast that's willing to admit it's recorded inside a moving vehicle and not just sounding that way. I hope to speak to all of you again very shortly. These updates are going to become far more regular, in spite of the fact that I keep saying that and my website doesn't get updated as much as it used to. But we're working on that. We're getting to a steady rhythm with new content coming, and hopefully a lot more good news concerning the Indiegogo campaign. So until next time, drive safe.